Thank you, Khaled. I would like to invite to the podium to the speakers or to the panelists of this session 2. Those of you that are in the room. So Ali, we have Ali Ajanay, who is Water and Climate Program Manager of the IUCN Regional Office for West Asia. Thank you for joining us. We will have online David Hernandez Gomez, who is coordinator for in the Mediterranean irrigators community. I'm not sure we have in the room Mr. Mamdou Raslan.
Yes, he's here.
Mamdou, can you come to the podium? Mamdou, of course, is the chairman of the holding company for water and wastewater of Egypt. We should have online Neil Dodd, who is executive secretary of AquaFeds, the International Federation of Private Sector Operators. Marwan Al-Ragad, thank you for joining us, who is the executive director of the Inter-Islamic Network on Water Resources Development and Management. And we must have online Vangelis Konstantinos, who is the executive secretary of the GWP Med. And we should also have online Xavier Lefleb, who is water team leader at the OECD. So thank you all for joining us in this panel. My name is Roberto Martin Hurtado. I'm Senior Water Advisor on Water Economics for the EU-UfM Secretariat. And as you have seen, the overall focus of this event is the improvement of water investment policies. So when we talk about water investments, we have the downstream when we get to the level of the projects and have well-designed projects, well-implemented projects that actually provide sustainable services. But to enable that, we need a good policy framework, good legislation, good policies, good institutions that would help to guide the development of the water sector. And we wanted to start the focus of this event hearing from different stakeholders. So we have representatives on this panel from, let's say, local people who work with local communities that care about the environment. We have, public utilities. We have private sector operators, and we have, people that deal with, other social, civil society organizations. And also, people that, work in think tanks and, are being, doing cross-country policy analysis that can help us in the discussion today. The three overarching questions of this session, I will, answer them as we go through a, conversation with our panelists. Are first, trying to understand examples of recent improvements in water investment policies across southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, so we can learn from each other, so we can recognize success and celebrate it. But we also want to look at what aspects of their water investment policies do our countries need to improve to mobilize and sustain investments in water security. And finally, going back to what our Master of Ceremony was starting with, how can the EU, the EU-UfM, and other partners best support the efforts of national authorities to mobilize and sustain investments in water security? We will not have formal presentations. Rather, each panelist will address a number of specific questions, and hopefully we should have some time at the end for the panelists to interact with each other and to interact with the audience. So we're going to start with Mr. Ali Ajanay. As I said, Water and Climate Program Manager at the IUCN Regional Office for West Asia. Thank you for coming, Ali.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto.
I would encourage, all the panelists to introduce themselves if they want to say something in particular about the organizations. That they're very welcome to do that. But my first question for you, Ali, would be: how do current water investment policies in Eastern and Southern Mediterranean countries affect investments by farmers and by local communities?
Okay.
Now, yes.
Thank you, Roberto. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you here, and thank you very much for EU and UfM for inviting us for this very interesting session. Actually, first of all, my name is Ali Hayajni. I'm coming in from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and working for West Asia region. We are here talking about water investment policy and how we can have a sustainable water investment policy for the southern Mediterranean countries. But I want first to highlight some points regarding the current existing policies that considering actually and focusing on the supply sides of the water. As we all know that here in the southern countries or in the MENA region, suffering a lot of water challenges regarding the challenges coming from the climate change issues, economic and population growth. So there is a big gap between the water availability and demand. Actually, the current investment plans and the current investment strategy, it's only focusing in this side, the supply side. But what about the demand side? What we can do in the demand side? We as IUCN, we are looking for water as one of the main components of the ecosystem. So all the governments and the policymakers in water sectors, usually they are focusing about engineering solutions, fast engineering solution, regardless if it's sustainable, regardless if it's green, regardless the cost of these solutions. But what about if we start thinking about nature-based solutions? Okay, we cannot replace the engineering solution totally with the nature-based solution, but we can start. We can start with this approach. We, as IUCN, we are defining the nature-based solutions that all actions that can promote to sustainably manage the ecosystem. And we are talking about the ecosystem, we are talking about the watershed, aquifers, groundwater basins that related to water management. So I think now it's the time to focus more about least cost solutions, because all our countries in the region are suffering from the shortage of the financial resources. So we have to focus more in solutions that more sustainable, cheap, when we compare, and effective if we consider all the players on the game. The nature-based solution focus in the social dimensions. You mentioned the farmers and the local communities. We all know that the local communities and the farmers, specifically in water, in agriculture sector, which is the biggest water consumer sector, they are the end user. They are the beneficiaries for all developmental projects. So in the nature-based solution, we are focused in the socio-economic and the social aspect as well. So when we are talking about designing and implementing the water investment plans and the strategy, we have to consider the social aspect. We have to consider the local communities, the farmers, all players upstream to be involved from the beginning in the design of these plans and how they can implement it, because they are the people who are on the ground, and they are the people who can really invest in them to valuing the water resources. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ali. I think you have already answered my second question, who was to what extent are farmers and local communities empowered to play a role in the design of water investment policies, plans, and programs? So I don't know if you want to expand on that, but so I will give you my third question for you. That is, from your perspective, what would be 2 or 3 priority actions to improve the design and implementation of water investment policies?
Thank you, Roberto. Actually, if we want to evaluate the current and the existing water investment policy, we can see that still this policy, it's not to that much integrated and sustained. And why we need this investment policy? Actually, in our southern Mediterranean countries, we are okay suffering from financial resources. To have any program or plan in the ground without having a sustained financial mechanism that know exactly from where you can cover the cost for any intervention in the ground, I think doesn't mean anything. So what I would say that in our, if we want to improve our water investment policies or plan, we have to consider the establishment of water fund. We do not have water fund in our countries, or if we have, we do not succeed in running and operating this fund in a proper way. The water fund can leverage the finance from private sector. They can actually be as a mechanism how to provide the local communities and the farmers upstream with incentives to reduce the practice that compromise the quality and the quantity of the water in the downstream. Also, these water funds can drawing the future system, how to come up with the financial resources from different sources, from the government, potential donors, a private sector. So I think in the current and existing water investment system, we have to consider and looking more how to have a real and realistic financial mechanism. For example, in Jordan, they are starting with this initiative to have the water fund, but actually when it's come to the legal frameworks and how and who will govern the water fund, actually they're stuck with a lot of obstacles, but it can be discussed and it can be, we can work on it and we can get benefits from any lesson learned or any best practices in the other regions in the north of Mediterranean, that we can implement such water funds in our West Asia region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. I think there are some very critical points from your intervention. I would highlight maybe that investment policies need to consider demand-based solutions, not just supply augmentation. That they need to look for least cost solutions that are sustainable, effective, and inexpensive. And in terms of recommendations, well, they need to consider the social aspects, and in terms of recommendations, maybe stronger evaluations of water investment policies, and ensuring that we know how the investments will be paid for example, through water funds. Thank you. Thanks a lot. We have 2 challenges today, 2 big challenges. The first one is sticking to time. It didn't help that we started a little bit late. The second challenge is making sure that the online part of the day runs smoothly. So we're gonna see where we are doing well on that side, because our next speaker is David Hernandez Gomez, coordinator of the Euro-Mediterranean Regulators Community, who is joining us online. David, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can. Maybe we can elevate the sound a little bit in the room.
It's okay now? Good. Good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you very much to the Union for Mediterranean to inviting us to participate in participate in the event, as well as all the entities that are organizing and collaborating with this event.
Welcome,
Okay.
welcome, David. I wanted to ask you my first question. You can also, of course, introduce the Mediterranean irrigators community and FENACORE if you want. But let me take advantage to ask you my first question. That is, how have farmers been affected by water investment policies in the northern Mediterranean countries over the last 20-30 years? And I'm asking this question to see what we can learn from the north to the south.
Okay, first of all, starting with what is EICA and FENACORE, we are an association that are grouping farmers, users, or irrigators associations across Mediterranean countries. So we are based in Madrid, and we are sharing the offices and headquarters with FENACORE. FENACORE is the national or the Spanish Federation of Irrigators Communities. And regarding relation with the question that you asked me and focusing the irrigation sector, which is we know, it has been said at the beginning of the conference by Mrs. Silet and now with the previous speaker, Mr. Gali, irrigation is one of the biggest water use in all the Mediterranean countries. Some of them over 80% of the total uses. And the experience that we could try to share from the north to the south is the investment policies. I mean, for the last 25 years, sorry, I can't hear my voice twice.
Go ahead.
Now, I think that now it's okay. For the last 25 years, what we have done in European countries is a policy of investment in modernization infrastructures. We have been investing money in order to change the flooding irrigation systems, which are the system that all the water comes into the field and is distributed in a very low efficiency. We changed this system for mainly dripping irrigation system and also a sprinkling irrigation system. With this change, for example, I can speak about the Spanish case, which is for me the most known. We have saved about 20-25% of the total use of water. So it's a very effective measure if we want to save water and to make a very efficient way. On the other hand, it's also very important to participate in the modernization policies and process that the farmers are involved and are designing and together with the administration. It's okay, I think.
Yes, yes, David, I wasn't quite sure whether it was being cut. So could you maybe expand a little bit on your last point on how have farmers, to what extent have farmers been involved in the design of water investment policies in the northern Mediterranean countries and as much as you know in southern Mediterranean countries?
For example, in the northern Mediterranean countries, we are under European policies and we have to obey and we have to accomplish the Water Framework Directive. Water Framework Directive is a directive that are obliged to all member states to get a common planning for the river basin management plans. And also one of the things that is included in this directive is the obligation to take the end users into account for the participation process in order to elaborate the river basin management plan. This is very important because in this way, how to say, public administration and end users are jointly together in a responsible way to coordinate policies and process in order to invest in the best way the money. You know, and the money is always limited, and we have to look to invest it in a very efficient way. So if we consider the end users, and for that it's very important that the end users are together in water users associations or also in national associations in order to raise the voice, to raise their needs, in order to improve and the efficient use of water. So it's very important.
Thanks a lot, David. Maybe my last question is, coming back to what I asked Ali. From your perspective, from that of the organizations that you represent, what would be 2 or 3 priority actions to improve the design and implementation of water investment policies?
I think that 2 or 3 priority actions would be to establish some plans with a long, long return periods for investments. For example, we could say 50 years of long returns period to give the money back, to return the money to the investors coming from the farmers and the states. And also a very good measures would be to not consider, for example, the interest of the debt, or to have a soft credits for the farmers, because the farmer needs to be responsible for the use of water. So we have to put this question into their mind. And yes, always, I think that it's very important to collaborate together, administration and users. They can find the solution, they can find always the solution for the problem. And yes, for investment, these two priorities: long return periods for the credits, and soft credits with a low interest flat rate.
Thanks a lot, David, for your intervention. I hope we'll have time at the end of the panelist interventions to come back to you. My next panelist is Mamdouh Raslan, who is chairman of the holding company in water and wastewater. And my first question to you, Mamdouh, thank you for being here, is how have investment policies for water and sanitation changed in Egypt in the last 15 years? And I wrote 15 years because I think that's probably the last time that I met Mamdouh, when I came here for an OECD project on strategic financial planning in Cairo.
Yeah.
So I have a personal interest in the question as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's working now. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought this issue, because 15 years is a long time actually for planning. And this is give me the chance to start how the holding company starts. 15 years ago, the sector was almost deteriorated. Too many players on the sector. Everybody's doing his own. No planning, no coordination. Suffering from a lot of financial problems. The government was supporting the sector, but not enough to keep the momentum of the operation and maintenance properly. I think the surface coverage was very low. I remember it was like 4% for rural areas. And then when you start to do some work and it reaches maybe another 2% or 4%, until the government decided to do a complete reform to the sector. And the complete reform to the sector, was transformed to companies. This was a big challenge and a lot of big questions. Should we do it companies? Should we do organizations? Before the holding company, there was too many institutes responsible, in a different format. So the reform decided that, we'll go with the companies, and the companies is run by General Assembly. Let's say the holding company. The holding company owns about 25 companies all over Egypt, covering 27 governorates. And every company has a General Assembly and board of director. First time that the sector is being run like a business, like a private business. And most of the people who was running the show at that time was in private sector. I'm originally from private sector. I never worked with government before. And this was my first time to work with the government, and it was a big decision for me, a big shock in the beginning. But I was lucky that I was working from the other side with another international organization to help the sector in improving and reforming at that time. So I think the big challenge for us, how to change many things. First, low tariff, and we have to provide the service to the people. We inherited all the employees from the different organizations from before, so we don't have any luxury of selecting people to come and join the company. And this makes us very in a very difficult situation, because we have to change the culture of these people to work as a company. Before it was more of like a government employee, and there was no much. There is a limited time for working, and they never used to work on as a company as we planned. So in addition that, also the culture of reserving water was not exist. Everybody see the River Nile in front of them, so they feel it's a luxury of water, so there is no need to save water at that time. So, all these changes was addressed by the holding company, and then with assistance, a lot of assistance from EU, and from EU particularly, they started the first organization started with us on this reform, and it helps us. First, most of our plants, they didn't have labs. Then we started to have the established labs on all the plants and all the holding company. And then we started to address another issue which was affecting our financial, which is the non-revenue water. Non-revenue water is still very is considered high, and maybe some places, some companies is like maybe 40% or more. And maybe I'll say the average all over Egypt, we started with more than 33%. Through the years now, we were able to downgrade it to almost 29. We're hoping that, or 28. We're still shooting for getting at least not less than 15% non-revenue water. So we have a lot of work on this area with installing meters. Awareness campaigns was all over the world, all over Egypt. And then I think we are saying down the coverage of wastewater for rural areas. We reach about almost 46% or 34%. In addition to the about 65% all over Egypt. And I think we are with Haya Karima. There is a lot of improvement that will take place very quickly, because we were planning to do our coverage 100% in 10 years. We are now being allocated a lot of fund to finish it in 3 or 4 years at the max, and that's what we are working in Haya Karima. I think financially we have another issue, which is the scarcity of water, the number of population. By the year 2050 will reach about 150 population. So this means we have to really provide the water services to all these people. Water resources, as you know, our water coming from the Nile is limited with the 55.5 billion cubic meter a year. And definitely this was not when we were about 32 population of Egypt at that time. But now with even 100, definitely the share of the resident started to go down, and that's why we started to think about another resources, which is the desalination. We are converting water from, or we are transferring water from Alexandria to Matruh, for example, about maybe 300 kilometers. We are also from Kuraymat in Giza to Hargada, about 450 kilometers. I mean, all these lines will be stopped now, and this will be compensated or substituted by desalination plants. So we have a very ambitious desalination plants all over Egypt, and definitely the funding of this project is going to be require a lot of external resources. we are lucky that Haya Karima will be until now is being financed by the government, but I think desalination will have to go and with the private sector participation, and I think we have already a plan that's under review now for the whole country up to the year 2050, and this is requiring that we're going to increase the desalinated plants all over Egypt, and will require private sector participation to share with us on this project. I think I tried to cover very quickly all the points that you are working on and the challenges. We still have, we are still improving our facilities, our financials. We still have a deficit. We're working in a deficit, and the government is providing some assistance to us on this. But as you know, tariff increase was, before the 15 years ago, it was prohibited. Nobody can talk about tariff increase. But I think now with with all the increases on all the materials and the involved on the process of the water and wastewater services, the government is accepting, to move in the tariff increase, but taking into consideration the social aspect of the people, and that's why we have a classified tariff, progressive tariff. It means that the more you are using, the more you pay, and so we are trying to work on this as much as we can. So I think this is the two lines maybe that we are working to try to improve our investment plans and policies regarding the desalination, regarding the cutting the operation cost, but without affecting the service provided to the people. So I think
Thank
if you have any more, and
Thank you very much, Mandu. One point that I take from your wide-ranging intervention is that first you need to have the sector in order. You need to have a clear head of the sector, because 15, 20 years ago, the sector was much more atomized, much more disaggregated. And once you have a head of the sector, in this case, the holding company in water and wastewater, then you can think about having coherent investment plans for the whole country. And you can think more strategically about what your needs are, how are you going to cover those needs, both on the infrastructure development front, but also on the financing front, as you were saying. How do we move from purely, public budget allocations to, maybe being able to leverage commercial funding once we have, private sector participation, or you have credit-worthy, utilities in place. So maybe I will ask you just one final question then, is that what would be your recommendations for your colleagues in other Southern Mediterranean countries on what are, from your experience developing sector investment plans and in these last 10, 15 years, on what are the key elements that they need to look for, that the things that they need to be paying special attention to?
As I said, I think we encouraging private sector participation will be a key on the coming years, because the need for the desalination plants, as I said, we are talking about high technology, we are talking about very expensive services. The big challenge will be the cost of services to the people. We have to pay for to people, let's say in Matruh or in the governor, they have to pay the tariff schedule that's being approved, like in Cairo. if we go desalination, cost is higher, much higher. So Matruh people in the North Coast will pay more than Cairo people. So I think this is a big challenge that we are facing now. I think finally, because the government decided that desalination is a major resource now and become one of the resources for water services. So they will be subsidizing. So the cost of the desalination plant will be subsidized to the people who are living on other governorates more than in the North Coast or the Red Sea or in these areas. So I think this is another big challenge for us because people want us to see that the cost of cubic meter about 13 pounds versus 0.65 piaster, 0.65 pound in Cairo. I think there's a big difference. The government, already agreed that there is no other ways except to support this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. And we will be talking more about desalinization, after this session. The next one will be purely on desalinization. I'm gonna bring in now. I hope he's online. Neil Dodd, who is Executive Secretary of AquaFed. Neil, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Hi, Roberto. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, good morning. Please, maybe Neil, introduce yourself, and I will ask you already my first question, so you can carry on. So in your view, to what extent are current infrastructure investment policies in Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries supporting or undermining the financial sustainability of the wash sector?
Yeah, thanks, Roberto. Good morning, everyone. So I'm from AquaFeds, which is the International Federation of Private Water Operators, based in Europe and the region we're talking about, but all over the world as well. So we have kind of the global context. For interest of time, I'm going to make two quick points actually on this. First of all, I'm going to I think, repeat the point that was made from our colleague Ali from the IUCN about demand side and how the focus isn't on that so much. Having looked last week, I was tracking the projects that have been set up in the region, particularly PPP projects, but others as well. And it's desalination, and a bit of wastewater treatment plant, projects. But even then, in wastewater, it's also about kind of nutrient recovery as well as dealing with the nutrients. So that's great in that sense that there seems to be a very clear focus on providing more water through desalination. But so there's a pipeline of those projects, but I couldn't see so much about encouraging water use efficiency, because all these projects, these desal projects, are only going to create so much water. They're not going to create an infinite amount, right? So it's about the other side, managing the demand and through agricultural demand, but also I think one of the speakers at the beginning was mentioned talking about planning and housing policy. So this general integration of all aspects of public policy linking to water is something that I still feel in this region needs further development, but not only in this region, but everywhere, quite honestly. Secondly, a quick point about the COP26 that's coming up very shortly. I think it's about to start now. What you will hear people in the wash sector say about COP is that there is not enough connection between water and sanitation and hygiene policy, wash policy, and that connection between the climate change policies that countries have to put in place, the NDCs and the NAPs. And there's I think a kind of call from our sector to recognize the impacts of water and sanitation into these projects. And that's what the call will be from us. Because I think from our perspective as people in the water sector, we see that ministries are most focused on climate change right now. Obviously the pandemic's been happening, but climate change is the big issue. And so the NDCs and the NAPs are big vehicles for change that we see, and through that wash practitioners like ourselves need to make sure that those policies are aligned to what we are trying to achieve. So that's kind of where my assessment to your first question, Roberto.
Very good. Yes, I'm here. Very good, Neil. So of course you represent the private water operators. And there is the ambition of maybe the vision that, in countries that, we will need more private sector participation in the sector. So maybe you can reflect or let us some hints on, how the water investment policies or lack thereof affect private sector operators in terms of, being attracted to work in a country and to stay, in that country, or how they work against that.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto. So I'm going to say nothing new that hasn't already been said before many times. And actually, I was looking back at the report, the excellent report of the 2019 conference, and I think all the points are there already. I'm actually going to just bring out some of those again because they're as relevant then as they are now, and they'll be relevant in the future. And Xavier's on the call from the OECD, right? I mean, the OECD have done some great work on this. The answers are already there, but let me pick on some specifics from the point of view of private operators. What my members are telling me quite regularly now is that they see the importance of the shifts of the focus from capex to opex investment, and particularly on O&M and investment increasing local skills and capacity. And I think that's the difference. And we are perhaps we are calling on IFIs and others to recognize more and more the need for investment in ongoing operations, building local skills and capacity, and also I think providing guarantees at the O&M phase rather than particularly the capex phase, which has been a kind of more of the traditional approach. But I'd be interested to see others' views on that. Another thing you'll hear private operators say many, many times, and you've heard it from the past, is about depoliticizing water and sanitation and health. And it's a very difficult one to do. I know the politicians will not want to let go of this issue, but what we have found is and some countries in the regions are in this region are doing it, where there's independent regulation and really much greater transparency around performance of the utility, and also a much better conversation, an adult conversation with users about what they're paying for and what they're getting for their money. And I think that if you, particularly with PPPs, because we still suffer this legacy in some regions, this kind of legacy of the past, but which isn't real now. If you want to bring users along with you, you have to involve them at every single stage. And this was a point that was made in the 2019 conference that we had, and it's still really relevant. And finally, I think really an obvious call is we believe there's a lot of private capital out there waiting to be spent. The financing gap, we don't necessarily believe there is such a financing gap as some might say. There's plenty of private capital. It is all about bankable projects and getting the system around it, the governance and the regulation right. But this is nothing new. People have made it many times, but if we focus on these fundamentals in this region, we will make huge progress. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Please stay with us as we hope to have a bit of interaction with the audience in a few minutes. So I'm gonna go to Marwan Aragat. Welcome, Marwan, who is the Executive Director of the Islamic Network on Water Resources Development and Management. So let me do the same as with other speakers. Ask you my first question, and you can, introduce yourself and your organization. So we have been talking primarily about, hard infrastructure, although, Ali has brought in the need to talk about, non-hard solutions. And so I wanted to ask you, to what extent water investment policies in the region include investments in soft and non-infrastructure investments, including information management.
Thank you so much, Roberto, and we're thankful to UfM for inviting us for this important session. My name is Marwan Aragat, the Executive Director of the Inter-Islamic Network of Water Resources Development and Management, an OIC entity hosted in Jordan since 1987. I totally agree with your reporter that we are almost or always investing in the hard solutions, in the what I call it the gray solutions. It happened that I'm a university professor originally, so I appreciate the importance of data and how data can be used in sustaining our investment and sustaining our project. Living in the post-pandemic era now, after the COVID-19 and what was happening over the last 1.5 years, we realized that data is important. We are now in the phase or preparing for a massive digital transformation. That means most of our water resources, food, energy will be managed through the availability and based on how much we understand our system, and we cannot really understand the systems we are managing or we are investing in without having this data. Data is available, and we are having in the southern or in the eastern Mediterranean basin, we are having massive amount of data generated by different sources such as radar, satellite, different Google products, and on-ground stations that are installed by different entities. Unfortunately, most of the data remain as data. It's not being processed into the knowledge platform as it's known. Data should be transferred into information, then we can create the knowledge, and the knowledge will help us in understanding the system we are managing. It will help us in taking the wise and right decision in the right time. So it's really important to focus more on those data, and this will contribute for the human welfare. This will contribute to sustaining the water quality, keeping drinkable or potable water quality supply. It also will help in enhancing the resilience of communities to climate change through providing timely manner early warning system that help communities to be more resilient and also help to sustain our investment in water sector. So the importance of data is massive, and we should proceed more in finding tools on the use of data or the soft component in managing water systems, especially for transboundary basin, for regional aspect of shared basin, where we can really monitor our investment in a wise way.
Thank you. So I take that, you said, we have the data. That data is not yet knowledge, so it's not really being used, for example, fully for informing water investment plans, right? Are there any examples that countries that may be a little bit ahead that are better at creating knowledge and applying it to inform water investment policies and plans? And I'm thinking, for example, in terms of climate change, that is, in the region is a very, strong driver, and that means, new data, new knowledge need to be created. You just cannot rely on your experience from 30 years ago. So that really needs to incorporate that information on the policy processes and the investment planning processes. So what is your feeling on what's happening in the region on that area, and are there any good examples, or at least, some countries that are showing good examples?
Yeah, thank you for this also. We're having a weakness in this aspect, as most of the examples and success stories are at the local level. We don't have a regional initiative that manages the data, and unfortunately we cannot manage water data and water investment data at the national level. We're having very good examples from Jordan, from Egypt. UfM is doing great efforts in creating the CMID water poverty index and different indices, I think with the CAS. And those examples, they remain at the national level. I think what is needed now is to use the strength of international entities to proceed in this data management and data sharing at the international level.
Okay, and data is at the international regional level, and if say your colleagues that are working on the different countries of the region, your counterparts in the information and water agencies in the countries, when given your experience and talking to them, what could be one or two priorities in terms of improving the quality of water investment policies, making sure that they are really responding to the needs and using the available data?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of priorities, and in the post-pandemic era we have the priority of food security, and now I think we should deal with data related to food security in a better way, where we can share the data at the regional level. Food security that's really derived from the water security. In addition, we saw an opportunity from different shared or regional basins through disaster risk reduction and early warning system. There is a high demand. to work in investments into the early warning system and disaster risk reduction. And here we can see an opportunity to collaborate and to build confidence among riparian countries in different shared basins.
Many thanks, Marwan, for those contributions. We're going to go back online with Vangelis Konstantianos, who is Executive Secretary of GWP-Med. Vangelis, are you with us?
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, Vangelis. The floor is yours. I will ask you to introduce yourself and your organization, and I'm going to start asking you, to what extent are civil society organizations engaged in the development of water investment policies across the Mediterranean?
Thank you very much, Roberto, and I'm very sorry I'm not able to be with you. Tahani, Ayman, Almotaz, thank you so much for this invitation to this great event, dear colleagues. It's great to have you, to see you at least online and follow your very substantial comments. Roberto, going to your question, the civil society is part of making things happen. And I will echo Ayman in his first comment, talking about the triangle of strategies, master plans and investments, of course, leading to implementation, and then monitoring of the results of the implementation. And in all this, the civil society is a recognized partner. We do know that over the long years, supporting civil society engagement in the Euro-Mediterranean area, there have been ups and downs according to the situation in the country, including the political situation. And this is actually the current stage of play if you go one by one around the countries in the region. There is always one big issue that relates to the civil society, and this is to strengthen their resilience, their accountability, their effectiveness, especially at the time of crisis. And COVID has been a crisis period, continues being one. But also related to the political evolution. I can only echo what Mabdouh Raslan said about engaging the people, the consumers, for demand management, and also Neil having a similar comment. They come together in civil society organizations with end users and so on. Engaging them in an organized way is the best way forward. And it's not only that, we have over time and in recent years new forms of civil society, like social enterprises. They are emerging as part of the civil society, not only on the entrepreneurial side, but also we have a great movement and a great effort to engage more gender-oriented organizations that are also part of the civil society. We have excellent examples supported by Sweden, by SIDA through its new strategy, but also its previous one, the Austrian Development Cooperation. We implement such activities also in the region with support of both Sweden and Austria, including in Tunisia, for example, in the Water and Climate for Development program that has a focus on developing new policies and investments that have a gender focus. There are many activities like that. This is a real area for engagement. The EU has been a pioneer in supporting that. The UfM, similar. The UfM should continue doing so by engaging the civil society at all levels, at regional level through the water expert group, the task forces of the UfM water agenda, but even beyond, going at the national level where there is an articulation of the UfM finance strategy. Again, the civil society has a role there. So overall, yes, there is a long way to go. Support should be there. There are areas for improvement, obviously, but there is a clear benefit.
Thank you, Vangelis. My second question, we had our Khaled at the opening of the event mentioning, the need to coordinate desalination policies and renewable energy policies, for example. We just had Marwan mentioning that food security may be one of the big priorities for the region. Of course, GWP-Med has been working on the water, energy, food nexus for some time in the region now. And I wanted to ask you, what you have seen as maybe examples of success or emerging success, and also examples of failure in the region, in the sense of coordinating investment policies between the water sector and the other sectors.
Thank you, Roberto. The notion of integration is around for the last 30 or 40 years, so nothing new there. With integrated water resources management, and later on with the water energy food ecosystem nexus that is in the focus of your question. And we have seen excellent examples of turning investment planning into actual implementation. They have been mentioned at the start of the session by Tahani. Also, Mamdouh mentioned some for Egypt. There are cases that can be documented in different countries around the region, in Morocco, in Jordan, eventually, even in Palestine with smaller capacities, but still, and more challenges to face, but still there are important steps taken. Tunisia, evidently, also as a case. So there are good cases out there. There are examples. Big institutions are developing new policies or are evolving policies towards more nexus approaches. And here comes my first actual comment, that we should not miss the opportunity of shifting into more nexus approaches existing investment planning. This may be from the European Investment Bank, all the work done by NASIP, for example, the EU with Team Europe. Ayman was talking about the opportunity and the evolution of support to Egypt, for example. It is similar with EU funding in other places. There is a critical turn where water investments can turn into nexus investment with substantial multi-purpose benefits. And here we get into the substance of the nexus approach and how water is being marketed, if I can use this term, towards other sectors that eventually are stronger, also demanding more part of the investment. I will echo Almota saying in the beginning that the water minister has been the one that has been demanding the most, but maybe not the one that receiving the most vis-a-vis other sectors like those of the nexus. So here we have an opportunity to turn things around. And this relates also to modernization that David was talking about and the whole investment that has been done in Europe, and we can learn from that, but also the optimization of the existing infrastructure that can provide also comfort, let's say, to other objectives, including those that relate to nature-based solutions that Ali and Neil have been highlighting. So there are opportunities out there, especially if we want to target the private sector, and this is the big agenda that comes with the EU. I was spotting in the video that was playing before we started the session the words of the EU representative saying about an investment of 1 from the EU to 9 by the private sector and other partners or other entities in order to meet the targets. And this is the very content of the Green Deal and the Team Europe agenda. So evidently there, the EU has a great role. The UfM has a great role as an enabler, a bridge between the North and the South, the government, the stakeholders, having in the center the UfM water agenda, the financing strategy that has nexus in its very content along, let me also add the water employment migration with all the high objectives of bringing jobs and making change. Again, there is great support behind by Sweden, by other donors. Definitely the EU is leading the agenda. There are examples to be shared. A new vehicle that is coming up is a community of practice on Nexus, water energy food ecosystem Nexus cases. There have been recently, at the end of September, an important conference organized by UfM, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, DG Research, Prima, the Cyprus Institute, with contribution by other partners. And there was an agreement that the community of practice, bringing together not only science, but also policy making and making vehicles for outreach through media and so on, can become the case for sharing this knowledge. GWP Med is a part of that, and we'll be glad to engage. So yeah, there are also upcoming initiatives. I can mention the MED program supported by Jeff under UNEP-MAP. Nexus investment portfolio will be created through partnerships, both at local levels like in Morocco, in Tajir, Tetuan area, but also at the national level in Lebanon. GWP-MED is engaged in this line of work. Many more activities, and we'll be glad to collaborate with all partners out there.
Many thanks, Vangelis, for giving us also that tour of initiatives in the region that are maybe opportunities for improving the design and the coordination of water investment policies with other investment policies. Should we keep online, but with a new speaker, a new panelist, our last panelist for this panel, Xavier Lefleb, who is water team leader of the OECD. Xavier, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me well?
Hello, we cannot see you. We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet on our screen.
Well, my video is on.
So let me just as again, Xavier, I will ask you to introduce yourself and the work that you do at the OECD. And I would, my first question would be, what are the elements of water investment policies that have the largest impact in attracting funds and ensuring that infrastructure investments deliver their intended benefits?
Thank you, Roberto. First, I would like to say that I'm really grateful to the UfM and to the European Union for the invitation. The OECD has been engaged with the UfM water strategy from the early days, and we're happy to continue that conversation and share some of our work. So in response to your question, at the OECD, we argue that there are essentially two sets of enabling conditions to attract private finance for water-related investment. One set of enabling conditions are water specific, and another set relates to domestic capital markets and the broader policy framework for investment. So let's start with the water specific conditions. I think we all know that the key feature here is the allocation of risks and revenues across the different stakeholders. We know that different type of financiers or investors will have different appetite for risks and different expectations for revenues or returns on investment. The appropriate allocation will need to consider these differences and reflect them in contractual arrangements. And here there is a key role for development and public finance, which could be used strategically to crowd in private sources of finance. This is what at the OECD we call blended finance. Too often we see the public finance being used in ways that actually crowd out private finance, while it should be used to crowd it in. This can be done when development and public finance are used to de-risk investments, not as a substitute for private finance. This is a way to build capacities and increasingly make the water sector attractive for private finances. Now let me turn to the other set of features that can attract private finance to domestic that can attack private finance for water-related investment, and these relate to, as I said, domestic capital markets and the policy framework for investment. Think about a number of such features as the liquidity and the diversification of domestic capital markets and the finance industry. You can think also about other features like the risk mitigation instruments, essentially guarantees, being offered by development finance institutions or public institutions when it comes to water-related investments. Another dimension which now comes to the forefront relates to the materiality of water risks for the finance industry. One very interesting question which is emerging is, do financiers appropriately consider how much they are exposed and vulnerable to water-related risks in a particular country? And here we're not talking necessarily about investors or financiers who are willing to chip into the water sector, but if they build properties and they realize that if they contribute to building properties, do they really realize how much exposed and vulnerable they are to drought or flood risks, for instance? Same thing if they invest in irrigation sector or energy supply. Here, I would like to emphasize that these features do not depend on water policies. So far, the discussion this morning has very much been focused on water policies, But we have to understand that a big part of the conversation actually takes place with regard to, actually relates to regulation of capital markets and finance industry in the country. This leads to very different conversation with ministers of finance and treasuries. I was really interested by the testimony by Almutaz earlier this morning. The point here is not to beg for more money when we speak to a treasury or to ministers of finance, but to actually explain that water can help them do their job and create the conditions that facilitate investments more broadly. Hence the role of central banks, which increasingly becomes clearer, as was recently reflected in a meeting of the OECD Roundtable on financing water. I'll stop here, Roberto, but you see there is a very important part of the conversation which should not be too much focused on the water sector, but on the broader policy framework.
Thank you, Xavier. My second question is, ask you whether there are any examples from OECD or other countries that you work with that have improved their water investment policies in recent years, and in which ways?
Well, an important message, I think, that there is no role model. Some countries are doing great in some aspects, but maybe less so in other dimensions. So what we are trying to do at the OECD at the moment is to learn from the best practices around the world. And we do that and to try to capture them in what we call a scorecard that is designed to assess how the policy and institutional arrangements in a country enable private sector participation and blended finance for water-related investment. The scorecard we are developing rests on 3 pillars, which have been tested in selected case studies, in particular in the Balkans. The 3 pillars relate first to market liquidity. For blended finance to materialize, sufficient and appropriate liquidity needs to be available to borrowers on sustainable terms. For instance, one question is domestic financial, are domestic financial institutions, do they have the appropriate market incentives to provide long tenor commercial loans to local borrowers? The second pillar of the scorecard is bankability. A project is bankable when risks are allocated in such a way to give a lender or investor the confidence to finance the project. For instance, key contracts in relation to construction, procurement, operations, or maintenance should be in place, should be robust, and should be enforceable. The third pillar of the scorecard is the enabling environment. In essence here, the key marker of enabling environment quality is the relative confidence investors have that the expected return on the investment will actually materialize. For instance, transaction costs associated with mobilizing capital should be minimized through processes that promote transparency and discourage rent-seeking behavior. So if you take these 3 pillars, as I said, there is, no country is doing well on the 3 pillars at the same time, but learning from the good practices in each of these pillars, I think we can converge towards a model that can be a source of inspiration for other countries.
So let me, given the experience that the OECD has, on these topics, and that, the continuing development of new tools as this scorecard that you have mentioned, how can the OECD help to improve the quality of water investment policies in Mediterranean countries?
Well, thanks for offering that opportunity. Indeed, we would be delighted to engage with regional processes and selected countries if there is a demand. Working in partnership, our role here could be to assess the enabling conditions for private sector participation in water-related investments in the region or in pilot countries. Typically, we could apply the scorecard I just mentioned to support policy dialogues. The scorecard can help assess the strengths and weaknesses of this enabling environment in a particular country. I trust that with the political leadership of the UfM, with the support of the European Union, and explicit demand from the countries, this could significantly strengthen the enabling conditions to attract private finance for water-related investments in the region. So we would be really delighted to continue our engagements with the partners and try to have more hands-on work, collaboration, assessing the enabling environment in selected countries and highlighting areas for improvements, to facilitate further private sector participation in water-related investments.
Thank you very much, Xavier. We are a bit behind the schedule, but we had planned for a long coffee break of half an hour, so we're going to eat into that to give an opportunity to interact with our panelists today. I'm going to start from our online participants. I have a question here for Dr. Marwan Al-Ragad from Dr. Stefano Bonfa, and he says, my question will be, how can link vision strategy program to implementation if water data and platform are in place? So if we have the water data and data platform in place, how then can you link the vision strategy program to implementation?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we should have a clear connection between academia and policy making and investments. In the Middle East, Northern Africa, we're having something like 2,000 researchers per 1 million inhabitants, while the world average is 1,200. So I think we should invest this massive number, or this army of researchers or data analysts who can provide sustainable data management and who can provide the tools that can help us in transferring this data into sustainable project ideas and to sustainable investment plans for different activities. So I think we should be, to answer the question, we should be holistic, and we should consider each one as a stakeholder, especially the academia and the role of academia in making a difference in sustainability of investment plans.
Many thanks, Marwan. For that answer, I'll encourage people, participants online to keep sending us questions if they have. We'll address them in the few minutes that we have left. Next, I want to go, to the room here and see who, if you can, all of you that have a question, can you please raise your hand so I can see how many of you are there? Okay, a couple of them. So we're going to start from the gentleman here on my right. Can he be given a mic, please? Kindly introduce yourself and...
Thank you. My name is Khalid. I'm from the U.S. Embassy Cairo, the American Embassy Cairo, from the Foreign Commercial Services. And I would like to thank the distinguished panelists on the very informative presentations. I'm in charge of the environmental technology sector in the Foreign Commercial Services, including water and wastewater. And I would like to go back to Dr. Mamdouh Raslan and his talk about the funding and private sector partnerships that the holding company is looking forward to have this kind of collaboration with the international players, if I may say. So we have like the US Exim Bank or the FDC or other international funding organizations, and they are keen to be part of this improvement in the water development sector in Egypt. And I myself, being in charge of this sector, the water sector, I'm trying to build this link and collaboration between the Egyptian side and the US side through my job. So one of the challenges that I face doing my job, creating this link, is the access to information. So I mean that for any international donor or any international funding agency to be able to get involved in a project, they need to have the information early in the process. So having the information after the tender is open for application, from our perspective, is kind of a late time to get involved in the process. So I would like to know if the holding company, Dr. Mamdouh, is having a kind of a platform or a plan to make this information available to us to be able to get involved and participate in the holding company future plans. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, but I think the information is available yet. But I think what the process that we are using now is that we announce that we are going to construct desalination plants in certain areas. And then all the investors would coming with the funding agencies and providing some kind of a proposal to us and saying, okay, we would like to have information about, let's say, one of the big projects that we are announcing now is Hammam, which is in the North Coast. And I think everybody knows that there is a plant will be built on the desalination plant, Hammam, with this capacity. So they are asking us for the information they need, and we allow them to go to the site and visit the site and locations and all that, and then they provide their proposal. Until now, we have almost, honestly speaking, we have too many proposals from different organizations and the financial institutes, but yet, you know, the final decision has not been taken on the process how this will be happen. It was going to be an evaluation, or it's going to be some kind of a negotiation, and so on. And this is not actually on the holding company itself, because there is a very high committee which is responsible in this sector, which will make the decision about the selection of the best proposal. Mainly, they are talking about, you know, criteria like the cost, of course. Second is the renewable energy as much as they can. Then environment, how they can protect the environment. I mean, all the issues that going to be part of the proposal that will be submitted to this committee to evaluate. So I think the information is available anytime. You have my contacts, anytime you can. And I mean, we have, I can announce that we have almost 60 investors. They came us with proposals.
Well, thank you both for the question and the answer. We have the gentleman on my left.
Good morning. My name is Bassem Saleh. I'm CEO of a regional Wi-Fi company called Green Tech. And I agree with most views discussed today, but I think there's an elephant in the room that we need to address, which is, in my view, that success and sustainability are tied to profitability for the most part. And it's not just about private sector and investments. It's also about governments making money out of these investments. Most public-private partnership laws in the region are weak today. They do not provide change in law protection for the most part. They don't provide ease of investors coming in and quick turnaround of ideas into projects, which deters a lot of investors from coming in. This is, I think, a key issue that we need to address. And some organizations, such as Inordam, sitting here on the panel, can bridge that. Inordam, a couple of weeks ago, announced the launch of something called Wi-Fi Nexus Hub, which actually generates this knowledge and turns it into project ideas that can be provided to governments and to investors, and trying to bring them together to make these projects work. Another issue that isn't a deterrent is regulatory issues, such as, for example, subsidies. Not smart subsidies, but general subsidies. You know, when you subsidize water in a way that does not incentivize water efficiency use, you are just, you know, telling people to waste water. This is bad for governments, and I do agree with you, Professor. It's an issue that we need to look at. For example, in Jordan, we are now looking at the idea of putting subsidies, tying subsidies for the agri-sector to crops, because Jordan is the second poorest water country in the world, first or second. And if you tie it to certain crops that use less water, you know, subsidize that water, then it makes more sense than if you subsidize it for everyone. And you can do it over time to, you know, to minimize social issues. So I think the issue here that I'm trying to stress is that if you want something to succeed, make it profitable and design it that way from the onset. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those points, sir. Anyone around the table around the room wants to intervene? Please raise your hand. The gentleman here in the center.
My name is Professor Nader Nuruddin, Professor of Water Resource and Land Reclamation, Faculty of Agriculture, Cairo University. As we know, the Delta land is the capital, agriculture capital in Egypt, and it consists of or presents more than 2/3 of the whole our clay soil. But there is several treating factors in the delta land, like seawater intrusion, water logging, and even the irrigation water add hazardous salt to the soil more than 3 tons per acre per each acre, and also the reuse of agricultural drainage water also will add about 10 tons for each acre. And this is the treating factor need to be concerned. My question is, has the water investment will concern it or care only by how we can save water without looking for or regard to the treating factor to the delta land, especially the saline accumulation or salt accumulation and other treating factor, or we should study the effect of saving water or rise the irrigation efficiency or using modern irrigation methods such as pivots or drip or sprinkler, regardless the treating factor to the soil. I think we should make a great or a wide focus and make a relation between how we can save water and at the same time how we can look about the treating factor of the delta land. And I think also it is if we like to modern irrigation or save water or even water investment, I think we should start on the Nile Valley in Upper Egypt, not in the Delta, because the treating factor in the Delta is so much and it really can get the soil out the production if we only care about how we can save water, how we can make without any leaching fraction for the salt, even also from chemical fertilizers. And thus, we should make a good relation between how we can save water and how we can also keep the soil healthy and productive. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm gonna, do you still want to talk? So this is gonna be the last, intervention, because we really need to get moving. The second panel is even, more crowded than this one. So please, Almotas.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you really. And I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank you for this great job. Without having you with us at the Union for the Mediterranean and EU, we are not here. Thank you. And I would like also to emphasize, this is my Secretary General, sorry, the fact that my great friend...
The Secretary General doesn't agree with his compliments.
No, he was calling me to confirm. And my friend Vangalis, I miss you are not with us. And he said something very important, that the civil society, yes, of course, the Union for the Mediterranean will be always working on this multi-stakeholder processes to include all partners around the Mediterranean country, including civil societies, including the private sectors, as well as with a special focus on gender mainstreaming and youth. But also the Union for the Mediterranean also confirm for all partners that we will be also doing this multi-dimensional approaches where we engage as much as possible from the north and the south, east, west of the Mediterranean in order to enable this approach that we are calling it doing more with exerting less by exchanging knowledge. The knowledge come from the north is very important to be disseminated in the south. Also, the most important part while we are facing the climate change and the stress on the intermittent water supply and the issues related to the renewable energy, we need to look after also experience coming from the south, because south they are managing under stress, and this is something that should be also capitalized and should be also looked after in order to pave the road for a future that is really responsive to the challenges that we are facing. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Al-Motaz. I'm going to go back to my panelists if they have any, final words of wisdom. I'm going to start for the online ones. David, Xavier, Neil, Vangelis, any one of you wants to say something that, before we conclude the session? No, very well behaved panelists, as I can see. And now, thank you to the four of you for, joining us online. And to Ali, Mamdou, and Marwan, anything that you would like to say before we conclude the session? Mamdou?
Yes, I'd like to mention something very important, I think, for improving the investment, water investment, which is, when the holding company started, there was, when we start to do a project, we don't know where to go to. And we don't know what are the needs. So most of the project was to be constructed at that time by request, meaning that, I'm in my village here, I would like to have a project, so I'll go to the organization, and then, okay, we'll give you a project. When the holding company started, the first thing we did is the master plan. We completed a complete master plan for the whole country up to the year 2037, and which is identifying all the needs, and then we did this transfer to like a 5-year plan. So every 5-year plan we provided to the government, they allocated the funds required. So I think master plan is the key issue in the water investment. And another point also, capacity building, and I think it was mentioned, capacity building is one of the most important things that we worked on. And as I said, we inherited the people coming from different organizations, and they don't have the culture and the education in the water and wastewater sector. So we established what we call technical water and wastewater school. And then all these people graduated and then nominated on our companies directly to replace, by retirement, all the retirement people, we replace them with these people coming from this school. I think this is helping us and improving and increasing the capacity building on the sector. Thank you.
I think those are great points. Thank you, Mamdou, for sharing them. Ali, Marwan, anything else? Okay, well, thank you then to all of you for joining us, for the audience, so well behaved. And I guess I'll give it the floor back to our Master of Ceremony, Khalid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thanks to our dear guests. I think we're really behind our schedule, and I know that lots of things still need to be discussed. So I'm going to ask you, if possible, that we take only 15 minutes break and come back, if possible. And then we're going to have lots of things to discuss, and also lunch and so on. So please, let's be back over here, 12:15, and then we take it from there, inshallah. Thank you very much.